In the forest that stretched between the mountains and the river, the wolves of the Greyfang pack did not speak of love. They spoke of debt, of exchange, of what was owed and what had been paid. These were the words that organized their world, clean, functional, precise as teeth. Every bond had a price. Every price was known. Nothing of consequence passed between wolves without the silent accounting of what had been given and what was now owed. This was not cruelty. It was order. It was the system that had kept the Greyfang alive through 3 generations of harsh winters and harder summers. Through the thinning of the deer herds and the encroachment of men from the valley. Other packs had run on feeling, on the unmeasured warmth of belonging, and they had fractured when the feeling failed, as feeling eventually does. The Greyfang ran on exchange, and exchange did not require anything as unreliable as the heart. At the head of this system stood Kale, and at Kale's right stood Drav. This is their story. Kale had led the Greyfang for 11 seasons. In that time, he had not lost a single winter. He was not the largest wolf the pack had ever produced. That distinction belonged to his father, a grey giant whose death from a broken leg in an early frost had nearly ended the pack entirely, because he had built his leadership on strength alone. And strength alone does not survive a broken leg. Kale had watched his father die and learned the lesson with the cold certainty that defined everything he did thereafter. Strength fades. Position endures. And position is not given. It is maintained and reinforced through the management of what every wolf in the pack needed and what they owed for receiving it. He was not loved. He understood this and considered it irrelevant. Love was weather, ruinous to depend on. Respect was architecture. You built it deliberately, and it stood. What the Greyfang gave Kale, absolute obedience, the first cut of every kill, the deference of every wolf in every interaction. What Kale gave the Greyfang, survival. Consistently, reliably, without exception. He read terrain the way other wolves read scent. He managed the pack's internal tensions with the flat efficiency of a wolf who had no interest in drama and knew how to diffuse it before it cost anything. Under Kale, the Greyfang did not fracture, did not starve, did not lose wolves to foolish hunts or territorial miscalculation. The exchange was clean. The pack understood its terms. No wolf questioned them. Especially Drav. The only time Drav had seen Kale's authority genuinely tested was in the second season after his arrival. A wolf named Kor, older than Kale by 2 seasons, larger, carrying the grievance of a wolf who had expected to lead and had not, made the challenge explicit at a kill site, in front of the full pack, with the patience of someone who had been waiting for the right audience. It was not a fight. That was the thing Drav had never forgotten. Kale looked at Kor for a long moment with the expression he used when assessing terrain. Not cold, not angry, patient. Then he said, quietly enough that the pack had to still themselves to hear, "Name what you think I have gotten wrong." Kor named it. 3 seasons of accumulated complaint delivered with the force of a wolf who had rehearsed it and believed every word. The pack listened. Kale listened. Complete, unhurried, without the restless energy of a wolf preparing his counter. When Kor finished, Kale said, "You are right about the eastern border. We move it back 2 lengths at the ridge. You will run that adjustment with me tomorrow." He paused. "You are wrong about the river crossing. I will show you what the silt tells me. If you can show me otherwise, we change the crossing. If you cannot, we do not discuss it again." Another pause. "Everything else you named is a feeling, not an observation. The pack does not run on feelings. If you have an observation, bring it." He turned back to the kill. Kor stood for a moment in the silence of a wolf who came to a fight and found no fight available. Only the immovable surface of something that had already decided and was simply waiting. He lowered his eyes. He did not challenge again. Drav had watched all of this and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled since his arrival. Not admiration exactly. Something more structural. The recognition of a wolf who had finally found something worth organizing himself around. He had found it. He had never questioned it. Until he did. Drav had come to the Greyfang as a yearling from a dissolved pack to the north. 3 survivors of a territory dispute, arriving thin and wary at the Greyfang's border with nothing to offer except their capacity for work. The other 2 were absorbed into the lower ranks and forgotten within a season. Drav was not forgotten. He was not the strongest wolf in the pack, nor the fastest, nor the most ferocious in a fight. What he had was intelligence, applied to loyalty. Drav understood the pack's internal structure with a sophistication that suggested he had been studying hierarchy his entire short life. He knew which wolves needed managing, and how. He knew when tension was building before it crested. He knew how to enforce Kale's will in a way that produced compliance without resentment. A far more difficult skill than simple enforcement, and far more valuable. Kale elevated him quickly. Within 2 seasons, Drav ran beside the alpha on hunts, spoke for Kale in his absence, settled the small disputes that would otherwise have required Kale's direct attention. Kale provided the vision and the authority. Drav provided the execution. Between them, the Greyfang ran like water over stone. Smooth, continuous, unimpeded. What Kale gave Drav, position, protection, the reflected authority of the Alpha's trust, status Drav could not have built alone in 3 lifetimes as an outsider. What Drav gave Kale, everything. His speed, his intelligence, his judgment, his loyalty. All of it, without reservation. No wolf in the forest served an alpha with more complete dedication. And Kale paid him correctly. The exchange was honored on both sides, precisely and without interruption, for 7 seasons. What Kale never gave Drav, what Kale never understood was being asked for, was the thing Drav had wanted since the first winter he ran beside him. Not in place of the rank, or the trust, or the acknowledgement of his value, which Kale expressed consistently through the concrete language of delegated authority and privilege. Beyond all of it. What Drav wanted was simpler, yet more impossible than any of that. He wanted Kale to look at him the way wolves look at each other when the hunt is done and the meat is shared and the fire of it is still in their blood. The wordless recognition that says, "You and I." Not because of what you provide, just that. He had never received that look. Everything else he had gotten. 7 seasons is a long time to want something you cannot name. Drav had learned, early in his time with the Greyfang, not to mention it. The pack had language for function and rank and exchange, for the intricate gradations of debt and obligation, but not for the thing he carried outside the ledger. He had understood, watching Kale distribute recognition in measured, calculated portions, that this was how Kale experienced the world. Not a choice, but nature. Kale was not withholding warmth, it simply was not in him. Drav told himself this was enough. He told himself that the closest position to Kale that any wolf held, the trust expressed through delegation and authority, was the warmth, merely in a different language. He became very good at translating. Taking the cold acknowledgement Kale offered and finding in it what he needed. He did not know how exhausted he was until he stopped. The moment he stopped was an evening in early autumn, after a hunt that had gone wrong. A young wolf, Sen, 3rd season, fast and eager and still learning the distance between courage and recklessness, had broken formation during the chase, pursuing a doe that had separated from the herd at an angle that put him ahead of Kale's line. The doe escaped. The hunt failed. The pack returned empty, with the tight silence of wolves who are hungry and frustrated and managing both. Kale addressed Sen in front of the pack. Not with fury. Kale did not waste energy on fury. With precision. He named the error, named its cost, named the consequence. Sen would run the pack's eastern border alone for 3 days. The lesson was clear, the delivery was efficient. Sen accepted it with the lowered eyes of a wolf who understood he had no grounds for complaint. It was correct. Drav knew it was correct. He would have delivered the same judgment himself. What stayed with him was not the judgment, but the moment after it. Sen had looked up once, briefly, after Kale turned away. A look that asked for something beyond the verdict, some acknowledgement that the failure was separate from the wolf, that the error was not the whole of what Kale thought of him. Kale had not looked back. Drav had seen that look before, had felt it from the inside, directed at Kale's retreating back more times than he could count. He recognized it in Sen, the way you recognize your own face in still water, with a jolt and then a long stillness. He lay in the dark of the autumn forest and ran the ledger in his head for the first time with complete honesty. 7 seasons. Every obligation met. Every duty executed. Every demand of the exchange honored, without exception or complaint. And in return, position, rank, function, the reflected light of Kale's authority. Not once, not in 7 seasons, not in a single moment of a single day, had Kale looked at him the way he needed to be looked at. The ledger was balanced. and it had given him nothing he actually needed. He filed it in the part of himself that held the things too large to manage, and went on serving with the same discipline he had always served. But something had shifted. A number he had been carrying wrong for 7 seasons, corrected at last. If you're new here, welcome to Tale Ranch. This is where the human condition is explored through story, tales crafted with care, brought to life through the voice you're hearing now. Subscribe if stories like this one speak to you. The Red Fang came to the border in the first cold week of winter. They were not a pack to be dismissed. 8 wolves, lean and coordinated, running territory bordering the Greyfang's eastern edge. A border that had held by mutual recognition for 4 seasons without ever being tested. Their alpha was a wolf named Voss, dark-coated and unhurried. He had built the Red Fang from 4 survivors of a territorial collapse into something that now exerted genuine pressure on 3 separate packs. He did not come with aggression. He came alone to the border marker, and sat and waited for someone to come to him. Drav came, because Drav always came first to things that required assessment before they required Kale. He approached with the measured confidence of a wolf who carries borrowed authority and wears it well. Voss watched him come without moving, without the posturing wolves perform when sizing each other up. He simply watched, with a quality of attention Drav recognized, complete, unhurried, but directed somewhere he was not used to. Not at his rank, at him. They regarded each other across the border marker. "You run this pack," Voss said. It was not a question. "I run beside the alpha," Drav replied. "I have watched 3 hunts from the eastern ridge. In each one, you positioned the wolves, read the terrain, adjusted the formation when the prey moved. Kale led the charge. You made the charge possible. Without you, those hunts fail. With you, they succeed." He paused. Something moved briefly in his expression. Not admiration exactly. Something older and less comfortable. He smoothed it before it could be named. "I am curious what Kale gives you in return for that," he said quietly. Drav said nothing. The question landed too close for a comfortable answer. "I will tell you what I offer the wolves who make my pack possible. Not rank alone, not the performance of gratitude in front of others. Brotherhood. The knowledge that when I look at you, I see what you are, not what you provide." He let the silence sit. "I am not asking you to decide anything today. I am asking you to consider what the exchange you currently honor is actually worth, and whether you have been paying more than you know." He rose, turned, walked back into his territory without urgency. Drav stood at the border marker for a long time after Voss disappeared into the trees. He did not tell Kale about the meeting. Voss came to the border 4 more times over the following weeks. Each time, Drav came alone. Each time, Voss spoke with the same unhurried directness. Present, patient, never applying pressure. He did not negotiate in the way Drav understood negotiation, the careful positioning, the managed concessions, the deliberate exposure of need. He simply offered, with the consistency of someone who knows that the most persuasive thing is not argument, but repetition. Voss spoke about the Red Fang's structure, how decisions were shared among the strongest wolves, how loyalty was built rather than owed. He described wolves who had come to him from other packs and stayed, not because the exchange was favourable, but because they had found in the Red Fang something they had not known they were missing. But it was the way Voss spoke about Kale that Drav would later remember, when it was too late to matter. Voss knew Kale with the intimacy of long study. Not the study of a wolf assessing a rival's weaknesses, but something older, more thorough. He knew the precise radius of Kale's eastern patrols. He knew the sequence in which Kale positioned his wolves before a river crossing. He knew the particular silence Kale kept after a successful hunt, distinct from the silence he kept after a failed one. Voss spoke about these things the way you speak about something you have returned to over many seasons, turning it in your mind, measuring it against yourself. He remembered a hunt he had observed from the ridge. He muttered it, almost to himself. He is the most complete alpha I have seen in this forest. Everything in its place. Nothing wasted. Not even his wolves. A beat of silence. There was something in Voss's face in that pause. Drav noticed it, filed it away, did not stop to examine what it was. He described what Drav would have in the Red Fang that he did not have in the Greyfang. Not beta, alpha. His own pack, Kale's included, folded into the Red Fang's territory under Drav's leadership. Voss would step back. He had other territory to consolidate to the north, and no interest in running two packs from one position. He needed a wolf of Drav's quality to anchor the merged pack. He had seen no other wolf in the forest he considered equal to it. Drav weighed it. A good offer. Strategically sound. The merged pack would be the largest in the forest, with the numbers to deter any territorial challenge. But beneath the calculation, something else was happening that Drav did not fully acknowledge. He was being seen. Each time Voss spoke about what he had observed, the hunts, the formations, the way Drav read the pack's internal dynamics, Voss named things that Kale had never named. Not because Kale didn't know them. Kale knew exactly what Drav provided and priced it correctly. But Kale named it in the language of function. Voss named it in the language of kinship. The difference was everything. Drav began to want what Voss was offering, with a hunger that went beyond any of that. He wanted to be seen the way Voss saw him. Not just once at a border, but every day, in a pack he led, by the wolf who had seen him for what he was, when Kale only ever valued what he provided. He did not ask himself whether Voss meant it. He could not afford to ask that question. So he didn't. He made the decision on a night when the first real cold of winter came down from the mountains. The pack slept close together, not from warmth toward one another in the Greyfang, but from the simple economy of shared heat. Drav lay at the edge of the group, as he often did, close enough for the warmth, far enough to watch. He watched Kale sleep. The alpha lay at the center of the pack, with the stillness of a wolf whose body knows how to rest completely because his mind wastes nothing on doubt. Even in sleep, there was an economy to him. Nothing given that was not necessary. Nothing held that was not useful. Drav had run beside this wolf for 7 seasons, had given him everything a beta could give, had built, from the outside, the thing that Kale occupied from the inside. He thought about Voss at the border, the presence of him, the naming of things Kale had never named. He thought about Sen, looking for something in Kale's face and finding only the back of his head. He thought about the ledger and what it balanced to, and what it did not. The decision arrived without drama, the way a thing becomes inevitable before you have named it as such. He did not tell himself a story about justice or necessity. He simply understood, with the flat certainty of a wolf trained to see exchanges for what they are, that he was going to do this. That the moment in the autumn dark had already made it so. Everything since had been the time it took for the rest of him to catch up. He noted what it cost him to think that, filed it with the other things too large to manage. And he began. What followed took 3 weeks, and required a precision that Drav applied with the full force of everything Kale had taught him. He began with Sen. The young wolf had not forgotten the public correction, the 3 days on the eastern border, the moment after the verdict when he had looked for something in Kale's face and found only the back of his head. Drav approached him not with conspiracy, but with recognition. Acknowledged, privately, that Sen ran faster than any wolf in the pack and thought quicker in the field than wolves twice his age. That these things were true, regardless of one failed hunt. He offered nothing explicitly. He simply named what he saw. Sen's eyes changed. It was the same look Drav had wanted from Kale for 7 seasons. He recognized it immediately. He had known how to produce it, he realized, for years. Had simply never used the knowledge on his own behalf. He worked through the pack methodically, wolf by wolf, over 3 weeks. Not with bribes or explicit promises, with the one currency Kale had never distributed: the sense of being genuinely valued. He remembered details. He acknowledged contributions that Kale's accounting had deemed too small to note. He asked questions and received answers with the full attention of someone for whom the answers actually mattered. He understood, with a discomfort, that he was deploying the very thing he had wanted from Kale. Giving these wolves the experience of being seen, not because he felt it, but because he knew how it worked. He noted it, and continued. By the end of 3 weeks, 6 of the Greyfang's 8 wolves had been carefully, invisibly prepared. Not convinced to betray. Drav was too precise for that word, with its implications of drama and declaration. Simply positioned. Oriented toward him in a way that meant, when the moment came, they would follow his lead before they followed anyone else's. He met Voss at the border one final time. "I have terms," Drav said. "Name them," Voss answered. Drav named them. The merged pack. His leadership. Full integration of both packs' territories. Voss's withdrawal to the northern ground. Voss agreed to each term without negotiation. which told Drav something. A wolf who accepts every term without adjustment is a wolf who set the terms before the conversation began. He stood with that knowledge for a long moment. Then he agreed to the hunt. The elk herd had moved south along the river valley as winter deepened, into the territory where the Greyfang and Redfang borders met. The long meadow below the granite ridge where the river bent west. Cale had identified it 3 days prior as the location for the season's major hunt. He had planned it with his usual exactness, the formation, the approach, the role of each wolf. He did not know that Drav had adjusted the plan. The adjustments were subtle. Cale placed further ahead of the supporting wolves than he would normally run. The flanking wolves told to hold 2 beats longer before closing, ostensibly to allow the prey to commit before the trap closed. Each adjustment was individually defensible. Cale reviewed the plan and found nothing to question. He had trusted Drav's tactical instinct for 7 seasons and never had cause not to. That trust was the weapon. The morning of the hunt was clear and cold, the kind of cold that sharpens everything: sound, scent. The pack moved through the pre-dawn forest in the particular silence of wolves before a hunt, each animal drawn inward, running on memory and readiness. Cale ran at the point, Drav behind him and to the left, where the beta always ran. Drav ran the plan in his head one final time, each adjustment, each wolf, and where they would be when he gave the signal. It was clean work, the most deliberate operation he had ever designed. He did not feel what he had expected to feel. He had expected the flat purposefulness of execution. Instead, there was something in his body he could not file away. A tightness in his chest that was not fear. A wrongness in his stride that had nothing to do with the terrain. He ran and did not examine it, and the meadow came. They entered the meadow as the light came. The elk herd was there. 12 animals spread across the frost-grey grass, their breath rising in small clouds in the cold air. Cale read the herd in the first seconds, the lead bull at the far edge, the younger males clustered left, the cows and calves to the right. He signalled the formation, broke into the run. What happened next took less time than it takes to describe. The herd scattered, not in the direction Cale's formation was designed to channel them, but directly toward him. The lead bull turned into the charge rather than away from it, spooked from the right by something Cale hadn't anticipated. He adjusted instantly, pivoting to meet the bull's line. And the Greyfang wolves held. Not from confusion, not from fear. They held because Drav had told them to hold, had given them a signal in the moment of the bull's turn, so slight that only a wolf watching for it would have seen it. The flanking wolves who should have closed did not close. The wolves who should have driven from the left stood and watched. Cale was alone in the field with the bull. Drav stood at the field's edge and watched Cale fight. He had planned for this moment. He had not planned for what it cost to watch it. Watching Cale alone out there, every feint, every adjustment, every refusal to yield, and seeing the same wolf he had organized his entire life around, doing what he had never once needed to ask for help to do. Surviving on pure, cold, unassisted will. The tightness in his chest became something without a name. He held the signal. The wolves held. Cale fought the bull with the full ferocity of a wolf who has never once in his life not met what was in front of him. He was fast and precise. He took the bull's first charge on his shoulder, rolled, came back up, and drove for the throat with an accuracy that should not have been possible for a single wolf against an animal that size. He drove the bull back 3 times. The red fang came from the eastern tree line, 8 wolves, Voss at their head, moving through the meadow, not toward the elk herd, but toward Kale. Fast, coordinated. The specific movement of wolves who have been positioned and waiting. The Greyfang wolves on the field's edge did not move. Drav stood among them, perfectly still. Kale saw the red fang coming, saw his pack standing. In the fraction of a second between those 2 perceptions, something moved across Kale's face that was not fear and was not calculation. Something older than either. Something that lived beneath the system he had built and the alpha he had become. He looked once at Drav. Drav met his eyes. In that fraction of a second, looking back at Kale across the frost-grey grass, Drav understood something he had refused himself until this moment. That he had wanted this to hurt. That beneath the ledger and the strategy and the 3 weeks of careful planning, there had been something rawer. The need, just once, for Kale to feel the cost of what he had never given. He understood this. He held the position. The understanding changed nothing, did not move. Kale turned back to what was in front of him. He fought the red fang the way he had fought the bull, without reservation. He broke 2 of Voss's wolves from the fight before they overwhelmed him. He fought until he could not stand, and then fought from the ground. The meadow that had been clean with frost was not clean anymore. The cold air held the smell of it. When it was over, the meadow was quiet. Just the sound of the river and the distant movement of the elk herd disappearing into the southern trees. Voss stood over what remained of Kale and looked across the meadow at Drav for a long moment. Then he dipped his head. The merged pack gathered that evening on the granite ridge above the meadow. Drav stood before them, both packs, 16 wolves, and received what he had arranged for. The acknowledgement of his position. The lowered eyes of wolves accepting a new order. Voss at the edge of the group, watching with that same unhurried regard. It was everything he had built toward. He stood in it. Satisfied. And felt nothing beneath the satisfaction. Sen stood among the Greyfang with the look of a wolf who has made a choice he cannot unmake, and has begun to understand what that means. He looked not with devotion, but with the flat assessment of a wolf recalculating his position in a new order. The other Greyfang wolves had the same quality. They were not following Drav because of what he had given them in those 3 weeks of careful cultivation. They were following him because he had demonstrated he was the dominant force in the new arrangement. That was the correct transactional response. He had given them the experience of being seen. They had responded by seeing where the power was. He had used the appearance of genuine regard to move them. They had used survival to follow. It was an exchange. It had always been. Both sides had traded in the same currency. He was Kale. He understood this standing on the granite ridge, the pack assembled before him, the cold evening light, the smell of the day's work still in the air. He had not replaced Kale's system. He had inherited it, had stepped into it so completely that he had become its next expression without ever choosing to. The throne was exactly what it had always been. It simply had a different wolf on it. He looked at Voss. Voss looked back with that same unhurried attention, the warmth that had moved Drav from the border to this ridge. And Drav understood, standing there, the pack assembled, the throne secured, what that warmth had cost. Voss had given Drav what Chaol had never given: the experience of being seen, of mattering beyond what he provided. And Voss had known exactly what he was giving, had priced it precisely, deployed it strategically, and received in exchange a merged pack, doubled territory, and the elimination of the forest's most stable alpha. The warmth had been real. The calculation behind it had been realer. Drav had not escaped the transactional world. He had simply found a more sophisticated practitioner of it. Voss dipped his head, the same gesture as in the meadow, correct and respectful, and entirely without warmth. He turned to go. And then, so briefly that Drav might have imagined it, Voss looked once toward the meadow below. Not at the pack, not at Drav, at the ground where Chaol had fallen. Something passed through Voss's expression, the look of a wolf who has finally destroyed the thing he could never stop measuring himself against. It was there for a single breath. Then it was gone. Voss turned north toward his territory. He did not look back. The wound was deeper than he had understood. A bull's hoof across the left flank in the chaos of the fight's final moments. He had not registered it until the cold evening made it impossible to ignore. Asher looked at it that night without expression. She was the pack's eldest, grey-muzzled, having served 3 alphas and outlasted all of them, through the simple strategy of being useful without being threatening. "It will heal," she said. "Then, you will not run the same." Drav said nothing. She looked at him the way very old wolves look, as though they have opinions they have learned not to offer, and are deciding whether this is an exception. "Chaol knew what you were doing in the last weeks. He knew." Drav looked at her. "He didn't stop you. I watched him decide not to. I have been trying to understand why." She was quiet for a moment. "I think he believed you would come back from it. The way you go away from the pack sometimes, and come back. He thought this was another distance you were running before you came home." She folded her legs beneath her and looked at the night. "He was wrong about that, but not about what you are." Drav lay with the wound and the cold and the weight of everything Asher had said and hadn't said. The night moved over him the way nights move over wolves who are not sleeping, slowly and without mercy. He thought about Chaol in the meadow, the moment before the red fang came, when Chaol had seen what was happening and looked at him across the grass. That look. He had expected calculation in it, the cold arithmetic of survival. He had prepared himself for that look, and prepared his response. The held gaze, the refusal to move, the completion of the transaction. What he had seen instead was not calculation. It was recognition. Not betrayal. Chaol had no word for betrayal, had built a world without room for it. Something older than that. Something that looked, from the distance of a meadow, in the cold morning light, like grief. Drav had seen it. and held his position, and the transaction had completed. He lay on the granite ridge with his wound and his throne, and the knowledge that Chaol, in the last moment, had looked at him not as a beater who had broken the exchange, but as something Chaol had never, in 11 seasons of running together, allowed himself to call him. As a friend. The word arrived in him like a stone dropped into still water, the rings of it spreading outward through everything, through 7 seasons of service and wanting, through 3 weeks of careful betrayal, through the meadow and the fight and the cold evening on the ridge. He had wanted that word from Chaol his entire time in the Greyfang. He had received it in the last moment of Chaol's life. Across a meadow he had arranged for Chaol to die in. The Greyfang pack ran larger that winter than it ever had. The territory was the widest in the forest. The hunts were successful. The exchange held. Drav led with precision and without warmth, because precision was what he knew, and warmth was no longer his to give. The wolves followed him correctly, from the correct calculations of survival. He gave them what he needed and asked in return what was owed. He did not run the same. The left flank had healed badly in the cold. The stride it gave him was functional but altered, an eternal compensation, barely visible, that only Asher noticed and never mentioned. Sen became a competent mid-ranking wolf who enforced the new order with flat efficiency. He never looked at Drav the way he had looked at Chaol's back after the correction. He had learned not to want things from alphas that alphas were not built to give. Voss consolidated his northern territory and did not return to the border. The exchange had been completed. There was nothing left to trade. And on the granite ridge above the meadow where the river bent west, when the pack slept and the forest was quiet and the cold came down from the mountains with the finality of deep winter, Drav sat alone and looked at what he had built and felt the silence of a wolf who has everything the ledger can provide and nothing it cannot. The throne was real. The cold was real. The wound was real. Everything else he had wanted, the look across a fire, the wordless recognition, the bond that existed outside accounting, he had traded away in a meadow on a winter morning, and the forest had no exchange that brought it back. Chaol had built the weapon that killed him. Through 11 seasons of perfect, cold, sustaining precision. And Drav had been the blade. Some prices, once paid, stay paid. The ledger does not forgive. It only balances. And a balanced ledger, in the end, is just another word for loneliness.